It is called Artsy Letters, and you can find out more about it at artsyletters.com or on Etsy at Artsy Letters. I'm a writer. I'm a children's author and a poet, and you can find out more about my writing life over at robynhoodblack.com all together. I am so excited to be exploring poetry and art together, and I'd love to show you around my studio a little bit before we get started. I have lots of old stuff that I use to make art and other items and gifts for readers and writers. I have lots of old books and I upcycle these. I love old keys and watch parts and anything that has a story. And I even like old fixtures. And I love my old typewriter. If you come to my shop, I'll let you type on it. I make art, some mixed media pieces and prints. I have some local and coastal items, and usually I have more of these. I need to make some more Beaufort things. I have some prints and drawings and such, some mixed media art, some note cards and journals, leveled maps, magnets, some gift packs of various sorts. I love to make jewelry from old items and old end papers, old Scottish tartans from old books, things like that. I have a section of haunted jewelry, and these usually have end papers or covers from publications from, say, the late 1800s that I put into new settings that look like they're old. And old vintage chain and other pieces, parts that I like to collect. I make typewriter key jewelry and other kinds of jewelry. I have lots of bookmarks. There's some more letter earrings. Lots of magnets and other items which strike my fancy. I am delighted to be leading a workshop as part of Camp Conroy. The first time I did a found poem collage workshop was out in Bellingham, Washington, at the University of Washington out there for poetry camp. And that was for grown-ups, for poets and teachers. We had a blast, and I was able to lead a workshop. We had several dozen people, lots of poets among the group, and it was a lot of fun. Here, I'll show you a picture or two. So we're going to do something a little bit similar to that. The first poem that I actually had published in a book for kids was in this found poem anthology, The Arrow Finds Its Mark, edited by Georgia Hurd, illustrated by Antoine Guillaume. Now, another kind of found poetry is the sort of blackout poetry that you've probably heard about. I had the good fortune to meet Austin Kleon, who wrote lots of books about the newspaper blackout poems. Now, here in my shop, I say that Artsy Letters is literary art with a vintage vibe. I love things that have a story, any kind of metal that has patina. I love history. In fact, I love the location of my studio because it's upstairs in a historic building on Bay Street. The building is about 1889. And I'm next door to the Verdier House, which is open to the public. And I love that little bit of history there. It was built around 1804. And they say that Lafayette spoke to the people here from the balcony. Lafayette was actually someone that George Washington admired. There's a reason I'm telling you that. And he actually led campaigns in the Revolutionary War, even though he was from France. So I love all this bit of history. The reason I'm telling you that is that one poem I made like this, was for this particular piece. This is a personal piece. It's in my house. I'm kind of obsessed with time, and I have some old books in my studio, and I have some old law books. This one was from 1789, and that is actually the year that George Washington became our first president. How about that? So I made a found poem from an old English law book and put some elements in there, some brass elements, a bit of broken brass here, but I just loved it, an old key. I love this old pocket watch, which is probably 100 years old. And the poem I found in a law book reads like this. I'm a bit obsessed with time. I remember when time was indefinite. This second, a year. Time refined, engaged. And I think that art and literature lets us slow down and experience a moment. And it might seem like more than a 60-second moment, depending on how we perceive it. So that's an example of a found poem. And then I make some small ones too. Here's a little small recent one. So they don't have to be big collages. This one says, indulge your whole energies, making haste for a few moments longer. Wooded hill, green misty glories beneath the somber pines. And the text for this one actually came out of a periodical, like a magazine, from the late 1800s. And it has an old key, another old watch face, and a really fun little brass element up here. This would have been made with acrylic paint. We're going to be using something a little different for our project. So we're going to make something kind of like this. And if you're part of the Camp Conroy campers who got a kit in the mail, you've got everything that you need to make this item. And if you're just tuning in for some ideas, you can probably find some things around your house that would let you do something kind of similar. So I appreciate all of you joining me today, and let's get started. Let me introduce you to your materials. If you are one of the Camp Conroy participants who was mailed a package, then you'll have all of these in a little box, and we'll go through them together. And if you are just tuning in, I hope you'll get some ideas and be inspired to create something similar. There's nothing magic about the actual items that I put in the box to send to everybody, and you might look around the house and see what you have to make a found poem mixed media collage yourself. Alrighty, now this is the little mat board and substrate we're going to use. Substrate is a fancy word for backing, and instead of making a traditional open the mat kind of arrangement here for you, I just glued the mat board around, and you're going to actually glue your project right in the middle, but we're not doing that yet. So what I'd like you to do is take out the two cards that are in here and tuck this back in just to keep it safe. Because I like to use vintage items, I have given you a couple of things to use for your found poem. The tree card is simply because the theme is trees. I doubt you're going to be able to find a poem about trees from this card. We'll talk about that in just a minute. But these are old. This little tree card comes from a game called Tree Spotter Cards, and it was published in around like 1950, early 50s. So it's older than I am. And then this card that you've got, this is where you're going to find your poem, is from something called Cards of Science. This one is barely older than I am. I think that these were published around 1960 or so. And these were, oh, what does it say? Something about easy experiments you can do at home or something like that. So you'll see the front, and it shows pictures of the experiment that's being described, and here's the back. Now, if you read the experiment and you think that would be fun to try at home, because we all love science, take a picture of it before you alter it, and then maybe you can try the experiment at home too. My card says, keep in balance. And one reason that I chose this one is that there's a wonderful yoga studio above the Pat Conroy Literary Center. It's Balance Boutique Fitness. Now, I will have to really think to be able to find a poem in here. We'll come back to that in just a minute. This is where your found poem is going to come from. What else is in the box? Pen and an index card. You're going to need those shortly, right off the bat. Some inks, and these we will use later. These take just a few minutes to dry. When I'm working on these kinds of things in my studio, I like to use a kind of ink. This is S-T-A-Z-O-N. Do you see all these colors that I have? Because these dry almost immediately. Some glue, just a glue stick, and you're going to use this to put some elements on top of your found poem as we're making the art for it. We're not going to use it quite yet. We have a little bit more serious glue. We have some tacky glue. You should have some little tiny Post-it notes. I will show you how to deal with these in a little bit. And you don't have tweezers in your box, but if you have some at home, they might be easy to use. I did put in a couple of toothpicks and even some plastic ones, kind of like this. I'll show you how to use those in just a little bit, but you're going to need something kind of sharp and pointy for that part of it. You should have a couple of colored pencils in your kit. You may or may not want to use these. In fact, there's no rule that says you have to use everything that is in here, but I just wanted to give you lots of options, and I'll show you how to use them if you decide to. You are in the driver's seat. I'll show you what we'll do with this in a little bit. It's a wine cork. And you probably had something, either a little stipply kind of brush or a little foam ended kind of brush. These are just for fun. You got one or the other just to play with. We'll use those later. A paint brush. This will actually be used almost at the end to apply some gloss medium. Medium's just a fancy word for it's just some liquid gloss in here. So you don't need to quite open yours yet, but you'll see that it is kind of gooey and sticky in there. And it looks white, but it will dry clear, and that'll just protect your work. You also have a couple of vintage stamps, and they're green in color to go along with our tree theme, just for a visual. I gave you some little pieces of brass bling. They're little leaves, and they're vintage. They're just cute little brass stampings. You have 3, because in art, if you've taken art before, you know that the element of 3 prevails, and it's nice to have 3 different things in a design if you can. So I gave everybody 3 little pieces of brass leaves, and I'm going to use these right here. And I think that's about it, except, like I said, toothpick and some little cotton swabs in case you need to mix anything around. You might even want to use the tissue that was in there to lay down at your place, or maybe get some paper towels just to kind of keep your area sort of clean and keep ink from hitting the table, depending on where you're working. And then, one of my favorite things, if you like to make collage, and if you like to make a mess when you're making art, these are super handy. This is it's a deli sheet of waxed paper, and it's called deli paper. It comes kind of like this. You can get it online. Oh wait, I did forget something. You've got this in there too. It's a little sponge. It's just something that I cut from one of these types of sponges. And I like these because it has kind of the scrubby part on one side and then the little sponge there. The first thing we have to do is find our poem. So this part probably will take more time than anything else, even the actual making part. So if you've got your card, I would suggest read the whole thing. It might take you a minute. And then read it again, and this time look for a certain image or phrase that catches your fancy. You won't be able to find a rhyming poem in here, but you know that poems don't have to rhyme, so ours will be unrhymed poems. If your card is especially difficult and you can't quite find phrases, you might even make a list poem. But chances are you'll be able to find a phrase or 2 in here. So I think I told you mine was about balance, and on first reading, I see phrases like, the earth pulls down on everything. So talking about gravity, standing objects. What I'll do is really spend some time with this now and pull a few phrases out. And the tricky thing about doing sort of the blackout poetry like this is that, you can't move the words around. You have to be able to go from phrase or word to word to word to word. We're going to make this so that only the words that you choose will be standing out at the end. I'm going to show you how we'll cover up the other ones in just a moment. But now I will turn you over to your index card, your trusty pen. And I'm going to do the same, and I'm going to find a few phrases here. So here's how I would start. I'm probably going to first write down, I kind of like that the earth pulls. I may not use down, I may say the earth pulls on everything, but maybe the first thing I write down is earth pulls. This is scratch paper. You're not going to use it in your actual art, but it's just going to help you come up with your poem. So spend a little time with your card. I'll do the same with mine, and then I'll show you what I've come up with, and we'll go from there. Okay, that part's challenging, isn't it? But it's the poetry part. It always takes me a long time, and I've done plenty of these. So here's my card that I showed you before, Keep in Balance. I might even use that as the title for my poem, but I don't have to. Your poem doesn't have to have a title. And when you're working on one of these kinds of found poems, don't worry about capitalization. In fact, it might free you up a little bit to not even worry about articles. Here's my initial scratching. I scratched out a few things and it was pretty hard to read, so I kind of rewrote it on another card. Now, I like to actually put the words where they are on the card because it will help me when I am covering them up in just a moment. So here's my card, and here's the poem that I found in this little edu-card. Earth pulls everything to center. This place will not fall. When your body is base, you will stand. Bring your center and see what happens. No rush. If you need to finish yours, take all the time you need, but this is how we're going to reveal the poem from our card. Remember the little sticky notes, these little things? Okay, so you'll see that the sticky part is only about maybe between a quarter and a third on this little tiny page. You're gonna get some handy dandy scissors. This takes practice. That's why you have a whole bunch of them. I put probably about a half a pad in everybody's box. And if you can see what I'm doing, I'm gonna cut be careful doing this, little tiny piece of paper, and I'm gonna try to make it the width of the lines here on my card. This will take trial and error, like everything in art, or writing for that matter. All right, so my first word's gonna be earth. That's gonna be a little small word. It's probably only gonna need about that much of a sticky note right there. And I am going to switch the angle of the camera so you can kind of look over my shoulder and see more clearly. But this is basically how we're going to start. See, I'm going to put a little sticky note right over there and cover up that word earth. So actually, I should have looked more closely at my notes because earth pulls is right beside each other, these two words, the first two words that I want. So I actually need to make my little sticky note a tiny bit longer. I'm going to find the sticky part, and if you get one that doesn't feel particularly sticky, get a new one because you really do want this to stick down there. Alrighty, so I'm going to cut it about like this. We'll see how this is. You can always make it shorter. This is the tricky part. I can already see that's too long, so let me cut that. Let's see if this works. Then I'm going to place it and make sure you cover all of the letters in the words that you want to hide. We are hiding the words of our poem. All right, so can you see that? Underneath that yellow sticky note, it says earth pulls. You don't have to smush it down too hard, but you do want it to stick on there because we're gonna put ink on top of that. So my next word is gonna be everything. So let's try probably about the same amount of space that I had before. So I'm going to flip that. Maybe a little bit longer. Let's see what we need here. Yep, that's going to be a little long. Earth pulls everything. Now you see how I got it a little bit too long right there? You can either pull it off and start again, or if you can even just trim the little extra bit off. Let's see how that looks. Okay, that covers it up pretty well, so I'll probably just leave that there. Now, what are my next words from my found poem? earth pulls everything to center. Well, that's way down here. So see how I'm going to skip a few lines, and now I need to cover up to center. And I'm using the first two words from that next sentence too. So I need to cover up to center and this place, all like that. And I'm going to just do it all with one big long piece. Let's see, probably, that's pretty long. Let's see how this does. To center. This takes some getting used to and some finagling. Do you like that word, finagling? All right, I made that a little bit too long. I want it to end after place, which is right there. So I'm going to trim off that little extra bit and see how that works. And if I trimmed it too much and made it too short, I would just start all over again. And you saw that this one little stray piece right here had kind of gotten stuck on there. And I made sure to get that off because I didn't want it just to hide some random letters and make them invite themselves to my poem party when they weren't invited. All right, so that's the first three that I've cut, and I'll keep doing this so you can watch along. Alrighty, so now we get our little piece of sponge. You might want to have a little tissue or some paper towels handy. I gave you a couple of different colors of ink. And if you have something at home that you'd rather use, of course, that's fine. I tried to give everyone something light and something dark because we want a little bit of a balance. If you can, you want complementary colors in your design. Now, actually, one thing that I didn't do that I might just do right now, do you remember when I said you don't have to have a title? But if you do want a title, and I just kind of like the title of this particular EduCard anyway, I think I'm going to keep it. And I'm just going to cover up the whole thing with another larger piece of Post-it note right there so that it'll still be there. Here we go. If you want your poem to really pop, then you probably want to use kind of a dark color around it. And what we're going to do is take our little sponge, squish it, whoops, down on the color, and then think about it, but don't think too hard. But now you're going to actually put the color down right over the Post-it notes, like this, or however you want to do it. And if you want to, see how that kind of makes kind of a cool dark area on the edge? I'm going to go around the edge. This is how I kind of antique things with brown inks and such in my shop. I'm just going to kind of go around the edge. I'm probably getting this on my fingers now. Oh well, art is about getting messy. And we'll see how that looks. Now I'm going to add some pink as well, but I want to make sure that's fairly dry, so I'm just going to leave it there for just a moment. Maybe even darken it up a few places. And let me let that dry for just a moment, and then we'll add the second color. And I am going to add a little bit of the pink now. primarily, mostly around the actual words, and I still have my kind of guide right here, and I can still see where my post-it notes are a little bit there. So I might even use the other side of the sponge, or you could try using the back, but I kind of want to keep that easy for me to hold. So I'm just going to put some pink on here. Now if it's not fully dry, it's going to mix, and you know, we'll see what happens with that. You can also grab another piece of scrap paper if you've got an extra card or some scrap paper, and just, you know, see what it's going to do before you actually put it down, especially because you're going to be putting it down on top of this color. Alrighty, so here I go. If you want it to blend more or to add some other things, let's see. Some of you got these little stipple brushes. I mean, you could do that with your ink too. Just kind of, you know, just add a little bit more in a spot or two. Just try not to don't pick up the post-it notes yet. We're not quite ready to do that yet. But I might just add a little bit around, make it a little more dense in spots. Now it might take a little longer to dry this way. If you got one of these little spongy things, same thing. You could even like make a shape on there if you want to. Maybe I'll put a little circle like right up there. So here we go. We're gonna let that dry. But I would suggest, you know, make it dark enough that when you pick up these little sticky notes, you're gonna be able to actually see the words. Alrighty. Now, after this has dried a little bit, you might even want to test it. Maybe put down your Kleenex. Here's our handy dandy wine cork. We're going to use this a couple different ways as a brayer. This thing is called a brayer. Very cool tool. I have them in several sizes. This works great. Even a bottle that's, you know, something that you can roll that's the same uniform size around will work. So I'm just kind of seeing how much ink might come up on this to see how we're doing with the drawing. Well, there's some, especially that pink, but it's not too terrible. Another thing you can do, this is optional, but I like to do it, if you want to make the words really stand out a little bit, is you could get one of your colored pencils, whatever color you like. And while, of course, your sticky note is still on there, I just like to sort of underline it. You might even want to use your little Kleenex here. And I'm just making kind of a simple little line. It almost looks like a shadow around the words. Do you see how I'm doing it under each little piece? Just a little bit, not too hard. Like I said, you don't want to bring up the words quite yet. Just a little bit here. If you need to use your little cheat sheet and it can remind you where your words are, that can be helpful. So now I've sort of accentuated the words in my poem, and here's where sort of your toothpick comes in. Now, like I said, if you've got some tweezers, these are great. We're going to peel off our little tiny sticky notes. But just so you'd have something, I put this and then a regular little wooden toothpick in your boxes. But let's see, this is what I gave y'all. If you've got tweezers though, well, let me show you how that would work. If you've got a pair of tweezers, you just very carefully grab a corner and pull gently. See, I'm not being in a real big hurry. Do you see how I'm pulling it away? And I'm keeping it all going away from the words, and hopefully it'll just lift right off there. There we go. Now, if all you have is these little pointy things I gave you, I think they'll work. Let's try it. I'm putting that down there. Just have to be a little careful that you don't tear the paper underneath it. And in this instance, then you might have to grab your fingernails. See? Here we go. Very gently. You just take your time getting that first corner and pull it up. And here's where the magic is, right? All right, now I have my found poem. And now we'll have a little bit of fun adding some elements to it. I have decided I want to put a tiny little bit of line that I used this green colored pencil, just kind of right here between the title and the poem. I'm only going to do it for this little part. And actually, since I have one that's, I'll even add a tiny bit of purple to that because it's kind of like the pink I have on here. And then it'll look like that is actually the title. And it's separated just a little bit from the words. Okie dokie, now's the fun part. So next we're going to put on the flat elements. And for this we'll need our glue stick. And I like to audition different elements for my collages. I think I'm going to use this tree because I think it would fit right down here. And I'm just going to, oh, it's a sassafras tree anyway. I love sassafras trees because they have different kinds of leaves on the same tree. But I'm going to cut this out. I think I'm going to put it right down there. I'm just going to cut it. Look, I still have little sticky notes on my scissors. Get off of there. Just as kind of a little design element. Maybe I'll use the leaves too, or maybe not, but I like this tree. I'm gonna leave a little tiny bit of this outline, the little light card behind it, just because I think it defines it just a little bit. But I do want the trunk because my poem is about balance, and a tree is all about balance. I might trim that just a little bit. Let's see how that's gonna work. Okay, I think that'll work okay. Now before I glue it down, I'm going to play with my other elements too. Let's see, I have a couple stamps as you do. You can use them whole, you can cut them up, you can do whatever you want. Oh, I like this one because it's from New Zealand and it's got sort of that pinkish color, which was the color ink that I had there, just for fun. And then I've got this butterfly. Now the butterfly, I think I want the readers and the person who is looking at this art, I want their eye to go to the words. So do you see that wonderful round line? And that's from the cancellation of this postage stamp. See that curved line right there and the way that the butterfly is orienting kind of to the right? So if I put it over here, then the person's eye is going to go right off the page. And if you want that, then that's a technique. But I want the eye to go toward this poem. So I think I'm gonna trim the butterfly a little bit, just a little bit, because I want that line to stay in there and put it right there. Remember how I said the element of 3 is important? So probably mine are all the same. You've got 2 of one kind and 1 of another in your packages. And if you're at home without a kit, then you can find whatever you want. It doesn't have to be a little brass stamping, but you might just find a little piece of thread or any kind of texture you might want to use. Or you could make it all paper. Okay, I've got this one going that way. I've got this one coming down going that way. What should I do with this one? I think I'm going to give a little more weight to the bottom here and maybe put both of these down here. See what happens. I kind of want that on the corner. So I could turn this one over to create a little bit of movement, couldn't I? Oh yeah, kind of like that. See? I could even connect them. I think I might do that. And I might even let that leaf overlap a little bit. Alrighty. Now your stamps, of course, could go sideways. They could do whatever you want. I think I've got all this movement here. I think I'm just going to probably leave that one like that. And I'm pretty happy with that. So I'll probably glue it all down like this. So now, if you have a really good memory, you can remember where you put everything. If you want to, if you have a cell phone or your folks do, you might even take a picture of the way you like it so that you can be sure to reconstruct it that way. All right, I'm gonna try to remember where everything is. So I'm gonna take off the little brass pieces for right now, and I'm going to glue the little paper parts down here. Now this is where the glue stick comes in, and I've got my little wax piece down here. You might either cut it in half. You know, it would be easier to do it with the scissors right here, just so I can kind of have access to it. If you don't have a little kit here, or if you've used up your little wax piece of paper, you can always just get some wax paper or parchment paper if you've got either one of those in the kitchen, and just take a little piece. You just kind of want something that is not sticky, that you'll be able to smush down your paper with when you glue it. So let's try that. Let's do, it doesn't really matter which one we do first, but to try to keep it less messy, I'll probably start with the top and move down. So here is my little butterfly. Now I'm gonna take a little piece of this wax paper here. I wanna make sure that I get glue all around it. But see, I'm doing it on the wax paper so I can go right out over the edge a little bit, and it won't matter. It won't stick to everything else, but I'll have glue everywhere. Okay, now you can take a little bit of your wax paper and your handy dandy wine cork and roll it down like a brayer. See? It makes it nice and smooth. There. Okay, and you know, you could even, if you wanted to, outline that a little bit. Hold it down because the glue's not dry yet. But see, I'm even going to give it a little bit of an outline, kind of like I did the words, just to differentiate it a little bit. There we go. Or you can draw, you can do whatever you want. I told you about the gloss right here, this acrylic gloss medium. We're going to use this in our paintbrush. I want to make sure that your piece is pretty dry though, because if it's not dry, then it might make a big mess. When your piece is dry, more or less dry, after quite a few minutes, then open up your gloss, that funny little container right there, and grab your paintbrush. Actually, before you do that, if you would like to sign your work, now's a good time to do it. Because this is going to be your piece. No one else in the world could have come up with something quite exactly like this. So I'm going to take my little pen and sign my name down here. Let's try it out up there. There we go. And, you know, a lot of times artists put the date, the year. I'm going to put 2020 down there. So there it is, signed. So go ahead and do that if you want to on your piece. Let that dry just a little bit. And then take your gloss and your paintbrush. You don't have to get a bunch. And you're just going to put a coat of this gloss over your card just to protect it a little bit. Now be careful in case your ink is not like totally dry. Let's do a little test here. Okay, there's a tiny bit of pink coming up there, so I'm going to be careful. So you know what I might actually do is do the poem first. I might just do this. Kind of get all the little white spots first. Just giving it a little gloss coating. So see, I'm not bearing down really hard because I don't want to spread or stir up the ink if it's not 100% dry. But I'm just protecting it, giving it a little layer. Plus it'll make the colors of the ink stand out a little bit more. All right, so I went over all the words of my poem. And then now I'm going to cover everything else, including the stamps. So you don't have to do it kind of in a line. You can sort of follow Follow the ways of the ink. Every once in a while, yeah, see, I'm still getting a little bit of color off there. So I'll be a little bit careful around the words. And if you had that kind of stays on ink I mentioned earlier, usually you wouldn't have that the same thing. Although one thing I like about this little ink is that it kind of looks painterly. You know, it's looks more like actually painting with acrylic paint than the ink. So it has kind of a nice texture to it. Here we go. Do a light coat over your signature. All right, you're not trying to put a ton of this gloss on there, but just enough. And especially with a thick piece like this cardstock from the tree. Do you see how I'm going around the edge? I almost want the gloss to act as a little extra glue right around those edges, and then I'll put a little bit on top to make it all shiny and pretty. So you might want to look at it in the light and fix it up a little bit. Doesn't have to be perfect. And as you see, I kind of like the brush strokes showing through, so I'm not trying to make it all totally smooth. But I don't want big, huge glumps here and there. And I had some glumps, so I'm trying to smooth out my glumps. And there we go. All right, and at this point, even though this is wax paper, it does stick to it a little bit. I'm gonna pull this off. Do you see I'm pulling it off of there? If you have actual wax paper handy, that's great. You might wanna lay it on there. If you haven't used your tissue, it's got a tiny bit of a wax coating on it. I'm gonna lay that there for just a few minutes. And then while this is drying, it's a good time to wash out our brushes. Alrighty, here we go. Now it's time to first make sure your hands are clean. When you washed out your brush, I hope you washed your hands, because we're going to handle this white mat board. In fact, we also want to make sure that our surface is clean. So you might want to lay down a couple of paper towels, or the tissue paper if you haven't used it yet, or something, just to make sure that we keep this nice and clean. You can remove it from the bag. There is our board. And don't worry, I haven't forgotten about the brass pieces, but first, we are going to put our found poem in its little frame. It should just drop in like that. All right, so mine is gonna look kind of like that. So I'll take it out. I'll get some wax paper. If you don't have any handy, you can use a paper towel for this too. You just want something on the edge so that when you put your glue on there, you can go against the edge a little bit and it'll be all right. Now, you can use the same paintbrush that you used before if you like to spread the glue. You're gonna use this little tacky glue, and actually with this kind of glue, you have to cut off the top. So let's do that. So I'm gonna make sure I get it in the corners. You don't want it to go bleed out over the side, but you do want to cover it pretty well. Mine got a little, whoops, got a little stuck there. Because this is gonna hold it into our mat. Alrighty, and I'll just put an even coat all the way around. All right, now, very carefully, with clean hands, might even grab your little tissue, make sure everything's all nice and clean and dry. I'm gonna stand up for this part. I'm gonna take my little piece here, turn it over, and I'm gonna place it in its frame. It should kind of butt up right there on the bottom. And you kind of wanna make sure you've got, if you can, kind of an equal amount of distance on the sides. but it should just kind of snug right in there. Now to really make this fit, I'll get rid of this gluey piece right here. You can either use this if you don't want to put it back in there, or some tissue paper, or if you have some wax paper at home. Do you see how the ends are curling up there just a little bit? So take a piece of paper, and then you have a couple choices. You can either roll it again with your wine cork, or sometimes I like to take the sponge. And this time I'll probably use this side. See the little, the kind of scrubby side here, a little stronger. And I'm gonna just sort of press that down and make sure I get the corners. I'm pressing through my little piece of paper, but you just wanna make sure that it's nice and snug in its little frame. There we go. All right, it is time for the finishing touches. Find your little brass leaves and remember where you decided to put them. And for this, we'll use this tacky glue again. Well, maybe not that much. I made mine come out a little too much, a little too fast. This will dry clear, so this might be a good time to get out the little cotton swab that I gave you in case you're a messy person like me. Let's see. There we go. Just gonna clean that up a little bit. Wow, I made a big mess, didn't I? All right, let me get this little piece of Kleenex that's a little bit wet. If you do this, then a little damp paper will take it right off. All righty. But you want to make sure that you have the glue right on the points, especially so that it will lay down nicely. Now, I think I decided I wanted one of mine right about here. Kind of to bring the eye, see how the butterfly is making your eye go that way, and then the curve of these leaves brings your eye this way. So it just keeps taking you to the poem. All right, and I'm going to carefully just press them in there to make sure that the glue adheres. Adhere is a fancy word for stick. Same for that. And then we'll let it dry just a few moments. And as our old friend Lafayette would say, voila!